So the ends justifies the means with our imperial president. CNS News, Susan Jones. Obama's trying to prevent thousands of layoff notices from going out a few days before the November election, Senator James Inhofe said today. Obama's Labor Department yesterday issued guidance, quote-unquote, to the states, telling them that a federal law requiring advance notice of mass layoffs, listen to this, does not apply to the layoffs that may occur in January as a result of automatic budget cuts known as sequestration. You believe this, government? Inhofe, appearing on Fox and Friends this morning, said Obama, through his Labor Department, is trying to intimidate businesses, companies, corporations, not just defense contractors, into not issuing the pink slips, which are required by federal law 60 days before mass layoffs or plant closings. Inhofe said the president doesn't really want all these pink slips going out 5 days before the election. And he noted that if the automatic budget cuts kick in on January 2, as they will if Congress can't reach a deficit reduction agreement, layoff notices would have to go out no later than November 2. The general election is November 6th. Under the WARN Act, W-A-R-N Act, the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, companies with more than 100 employees must give 60 days notice if there's to be a mass layoff during any 30-day period for 500 or more employees, or for 50 to 499 employees if they make up at least 33% of the employer's active workforce. But in the guidance issued yesterday, Assistant Labor Secretary Jane Oates said never mind about those pink slips. Questions have recently been raised as to whether the WARN Act requires federal contractors whose contracts may terminate or reduced in the event of sequestration on January 2, 2013, to provide WARN Act notices 60 days before the date to their workers employed under government contracts funded from sequestrable accounts. The answer to the question is no, she writes. In fact, to provide such notice would be inconsistent with the purpose of the law. In its guidance, the Labor Department also noted that efforts are being made to avoid sequestration, making its occurrence not necessarily foreseeable. You can't not comply with the law, Inhofe said. Put yourself on the board of directors of Lockheed Martin. If they came out with a class action suit of $1,000 per employee, that would be $120 million. You bet they're going to send out pink slips. And by the way, they don't have to wait until November 2nd. They can send them out today if they want. But you see, this is just more evidence of institutionalized corruption by this president. The law doesn't apply to him. The WARN Act. Warn what? It doesn't help us politically. I mean, it's too close to the election. So I wave my magic wand and I choose to ignore that law, as I've chosen to ignore maybe half a dozen other laws. Not to mention a court order. Not to mention whatever the hell I want to do. Now, other than CNS News and some hatchet piece in the Washington Compost, I haven't seen that anywhere. Anywhere. Obama's lawlessness apparently does not offend the very high moral standards in the newsrooms across this country. Well, I want to appoint 4 people. Hence, Congress is in recess. Wait a minute. You're that branch. You can't declare the other branch. I just did. Try and catch me if you can. Oh, I don't like this law. What's this DOMA stuff? Oh, Clinton signed that. I choose not to enforce it. I choose not to defend it. You can't do that. Catch me if you can. Oh, look at this, our immigration laws. Well, I choose not to enforce them. And the court said I don't have to. We call this prosecutorial discretion. Well, how do we stop this? Well, I guess you can't. And on down the road we go. Right? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We've spent an entire hour and a half explaining why it doesn't matter when it comes to Obama. Individuals don't matter. All that matters is whatever priorities the government has. And you're a subject. You're not a citizen. And as a subject, you're subject to the will of the sovereign, that is Obama. And he'll use whatever power he has or even doesn't have to force his will. And we're taking one creepy little step after another in this direction. And the steps are now becoming like a trot, and soon the trot will be a sprint. And he actually has people in the media, not only who don't focus on this, but in the past have no problem with it, as long as you're pushing a utopian statist agenda, and as long as you're a Democrat. We have, for example, Richard Stengel, who I've talked about before, managing editor of Time magazine. The man was actually executive director of the Constitution Center in Philadelphia, from where he learned absolutely nothing. And not long ago, he wrote, if the Constitution was intended to limit the federal government, it sure doesn't say so. This is a guy who ran the Constitution Center at Independence Hall. If the Constitution was intended to limit the federal government, it sure doesn't say so. And then in the pages of the Washington Compost, which pretends to worry about government, only when somebody by the name of Nixon is president, apparently, we have Richard Cohen. Not particularly intelligent, but he's been writing a column there for a long time. This fatuous infatuation with the Constitution, particularly the 10th Amendment, is clearly the work of witches, Wiccans, and wackos. Nothing to do with America's real problems, and if taken too seriously, will cause an economic and political calamity. And then, of course, there's 400-time Pulitzer Prize-winning goofball Thomas L. Friedman, a.k.a. Friedman. And he writes for the New York Slimes, as you can imagine. There's only one thing worse than one-party autocracy, he's talking about China, and that is one-party democracy, which is what we have in America. One-party autocracy certainly has its drawbacks, but when it's led by a reasonably enlightened group of people, as China is today, now keep in mind, China's a police state with gulags, with summary executions. It can also have great advantages, he writes. Yes, I suppose it can. So, Obama has a whole chorus line of Rockettes in the media doing their little dance for him whenever he decides to expand his power and to impose his will. There's three people right there. Time magazine, the Washington Compost, the New York Slimes. Prominent to them, not prominent to us, but prominent writers in those outlets. One pushing the kind of totalitarianism. I mean, you haven't read China. Another saying, what the hell's up with this federalism stuff in the Constitution? The other one saying, no, the Constitution certainly doesn't stand for the notion of limited government. Obama reads all this crap and more from his left-wing friends. He sees that he does these things. Nobody trashes him. Nobody complains about, oh, that talk radio. Oh, right, talk radio. Oh, Fox News and Fox News. My buddy Eric Erickson just tweeted, I don't know where he got it from, but it's very funny. Re-electing Obama is like backing the Titanic up and hitting the iceberg a second time. That's a good bumper sticker. Somebody should make that. Re-electing Obama is like backing the Titanic up and hitting the iceberg a second time. That's quite right.